Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Sports Exchange. My name is Scott Morgan, Roth the Motor City Madmouth. Along with me tonight, Mike Santos. How you doing, Mike?
I'm great, Scott.
Glad to have you back. And George Eichorn, my regular co-host on Monday night.
Good to see you again, Scott. Great to be here. A hockey night, and looking forward to a great show.
I got to tell you, tonight's my hat trick. This is my third broadcast of the night. It began with the South Florida Tribune podcast, where David Levin and I talked about the Miami Marlins' improbable run to make it to the postseason. Who would have thunk that, considering all the adversity that the Marlins have gone through? After that, we did 108 Stitches baseball talk with David Hodges and Rick Curdy, and now here's the hat trick with you guys, and we're talking hockey. And as we speak right now, the Tampa Bay Lightning beat the Dallas Stars 1-0. 16:49 left in the second period. With that said, okay, since this is our hockey night, here's the first thing we're going to talk about. There's a report that the NHL may consider a hybrid system with 4 to 6 bubbles for 2021. Well, Mike, you're a hockey expert. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think if the pandemic necessitates it, they've got to do something, right? But obviously, it's not the best thing for the sport or the business. It's got them through probably better than they expected the end of the year and through the Stanley Cup playoffs. But let's make no mistake that these teams and the league is suffering from a loss of revenue by not being able to have a full season and have a full season with fans and teams playing in their normal arenas. So although it's a plan that they may have to execute, I don't think it's ideal, and I don't think the NHL would tell you that it's what they want to do. They just may be forced to do it. I'm a little more worried about what it's going to do to the other levels of hockey, in particular the American Hockey League, because the American Hockey League is really at the mercy of the NHL with all of this. Of course, approximately 80% of their players come from NHL contracts, and not being able to have their own season or maybe even plan for their own season in any way until the NHL makes its decisions is tough on them. So it's going to be real interesting, but I'm glad they're trying to do something for hockey fans and for the hockey players who want to get paid. But ultimately, we got to get back to the way this game's meant to be played in front of people.
George?
Absolutely agree. I just hope Detroit's one of those bubble cities. Of course, we are known as Hockey Town, and it has a great following, as you know, the sport does here in Detroit. I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, again, just like in baseball, the minor league players are hurt, and you bring up a good point that the minor leagues of hockey are hurt right now too. These are cities that Flint, Michigan, and Sheboygan, or whatever city there's a team. These teams have to survive, and these small towns have to survive. Hockey has to survive, not only on the major league level, but like you mentioned, on the minor league level, the junior A level. It's very important that we get things back in order. And obviously, as was mentioned there, it's a money situation too. These clubs cannot keep going on losing these amounts of money, this amount that they're losing this year alone, let alone if they do a bubble next year. But again, I understand if it's safety, if it means saving the season, then I'm all in.
Yeah, I think that if you were looking at 6 cities, hypothetically, and they go 6, there's no question you got to bring Toronto and Edmonton back. They've done a sensational job with the playoffs. Now the question is where the other ones would go. Obviously, I would certainly like to see it in Detroit, but I think a lot of that would depend on how many COVID cases you have. I don't know whether or not LA would be a probability, and so I don't know. The other 4, to me, if you had to venture a guess, Mike, what other 4 cities you think would be primary candidates to host NHL hockey?
I think they would go back to the cities that they were talking about prior to selecting Edmonton and Toronto this year. So one would be Columbus, Ohio, for sure. I hate to say that to you guys, but that's probably going to tell Detroit that it ain't happening there.
Okay.
I think Columbus, Ohio is probably one of them. They've got the facility. They also have a facility where the practice rink is attached to the arena.
I was actually there before when I saw the Red Wings take on Columbus. The Nationwide Arena had that practice facility next to it. Yeah, that would be a good spot.
And they've got the type of city there with hotels right around the arena that would make for an easy bubble situation. So I think that would be one for sure. The other one that was talked about prior to starting up again this year was Las Vegas. I think, again, for similar reasons as Columbus, and the availability of hotels right next to the arena is one that they'll certainly consider. And then I think you've got to look down in the Southeast and the Southwest, just because for geography reasons and not being able to have people travel. So I think you're looking at potentially somebody like a Tampa Bay or Florida, and then going out into the Southwest, probably a place like Dallas again, where they have the ability and the facilities right there. I mean, those would be my guesses. With the first four, definitely, in my opinion, would definitely be Edmonton, Toronto, Columbus, and Las Vegas.
Yeah, I couldn't debate those. I agree with you on all six. Go ahead, George.
Well, obviously you're right, Mike. I mean, if Columbus isn't definitely in the mix, and it was, like you said, in the preliminary bubble this year, that would ace out Detroit and Chicago and cities like that in the Midwest. I'd like to throw out a Carolina. Instead of going to Florida, why don't we go to Carolina, or why don't we go to Nashville? Well, again, Nashville I know is more of a hip town, and obviously Music City, and there's there could be more COVID cases there because it's such an open city. Their downtown obviously is always hopping, but so is Vegas's downtown. So, and then I don't know, why wouldn't you go once in the Northeast? I mean, my gosh, you got Philadelphia, you got Boston, you got New York, New Jersey. I mean, you got all these cities in the Northeast, although, that being said, obviously they were not in contention this past year for the bubble, but I can't argue with Vegas and Columbus, though. You're right. They were in the finals, the final running to do it this year, Mike and Scott. So those would probably be my two favorites. And the other two, I'll just go on the limb and say Carolina, and I'll go with your Dallas, too.
Okay. Well, you know what, Mike? All 6 years are exactly where I'd go. And I guess I'd be partial toward Columbus. I've been in that arena, so I know exactly what you're talking about. Practice rink connected to the actual rink itself, and you need a good practice facility nowadays.
Regardless of where it's going to be, though, I still think it's going to be awfully difficult to get these players to agree to go back into this situation. I mean, the teams that are playing tonight, they've been in this situation for 12 months, basically going back and forth
right.
from a hotel room to an arena, no fans, no family, and to try to get them to turn around in a couple months here and do the same thing for another, who knows how many months, if they do start up in January like they hope to, and run some sort of a half season plus playoffs, you're talking again about another 4 to 5 months minimum.
Right.
Yeah.
And I don't know how the players are going to react to that. And of course, anything they do and decide will have to be agreed upon by the Players Association. I don't think we're going to know a lot until this is all over here tonight. And they've got a lot of business they've got to take care of before they even get there. Things like the draft, free agency, like all sports. I mean, the NBA is going to face this and everything. It's not to bring up the American League again, but not just the American League, but it's going to trickle down to everything. It's going to trickle down to junior hockey, to college hockey, when it comes to players that are being drafted, players that are signing or not signing. I know in the U.S. anyways, there are kids who were committed to go play college hockey this year, and their college hockey programs are not playing, or they're not decided if they're playing until the second half of the year. So they've gone back and played U.S. junior hockey for another year. So there's just so much up in the air. I mean, I think it's just wonderful that this worked out the way it did for the last few months. But boy, there's a lot of questions still to be answered to try to do this again.
Yeah, as much as I have to tell you, I'm impressed with the Columbus facility. Have you ever been to Little Caesars Arena, Mike?
Only once when it first opened. But
Yeah, well, they have a nice practice facility actually in the building. So,
Yes.
so I guess if you're going to connect practice facilities, that one's pretty good. So, all right, we'll move on to the NHL. Records its 10th straight week with no positive COVID-19 test. I've been a firm believer all along that I thought that the NHL had one of the best bubbles, and I felt that they could easily pull it off. And indeed, the NHL's proven a lot of people right. And while you're looking at the screen, I'll do it for you. Update. Tampa Bay Lightning to the Dallas Stars. Nothing, 11:58 left in the second period. There's your update. But that said, let's talk about the NHL bubble. I knew it was a great bubble from the start, and indeed it has become exactly that. So,
yeah, I mean they've done a great job, and a lot of credit has to go to obviously the NHL and the NHLPA, but most of the credit has to go to the players themselves, because they're the ones that can ruin this, right? I mean, this is all about the players. It's all about watching them play, and so all it takes is some players to break the rules and do a few things that they shouldn't be doing, and the next thing you know, you do have some positive tests, and it throws everything into disarray. So I give them the most credit. And again, I think that's going to be the biggest challenge, is whether they're willing to make this type of sacrifice for another half a season, and to do it in a couple of months, start all over.
yeah, they've been great. George, I'll tell you, the NHL bubble's been brilliant.
Well, it has been. Obviously, my comparison is to the Major League Baseball, where you have not had a bubble. And you had some instances, as we saw during the season, the St. Louis Cardinals and others, were Miami Marlins, of course. And there were a lot of incidents with baseball because there was no bubble, and they were traveling. And then some of the players were doing things like they shouldn't have been doing, obviously going out at night or going out to visit a friend or something for dinner. And it obviously had a bad effect on it, although baseball has recovered nicely and is going into their postseason beginning Tuesday night. Basketball, again, the NBA, they've done a great job too. The NBA has stayed in the bubble, and we're getting ready now for the Miami Heat and the LA Lakers for their final series. But I do give credit to where credit is due, like you guys said, Mike and Scott. The NHL has done superb, and Toronto and Edmonton, hats off. You have done a great job. Both of the bubble cities have done great, and it's a credit to the sport and to the commissioner and the Players Association for pulling this off.
Okay, let's go on to Steve Stamkos out for the remainder of the Stanley Cup final. Right now, if for some reason or another the Dallas Stars pull off, they come back and win this hockey game. How important is Steve Stamkos, if he isn't available, for the Tampa Bay Lightning, or do you feel, Mike, that they're that deep that they could still win it without him?
Well, I mean, I'm not to say I told you so, Scott, but I told you so, right? I mean, we talked about this when we did a preview before the season started. And I told you then, hands down, that I thought they were the team to beat,
right,
for sure. We talked about this when we got started up again, and you asked me who my pick was, and I said the Tampa Bay Lightning for sure. And so, although I feel bad for Steven Stamkos because he's put in so many years there, and he's been a good citizen and been loyal to the Lightning, I don't think they miss him all that much. I really don't. Certainly, as we saw in the one game he did play here in the finals, he can still shoot the puck. and he's nice to have, at the top of the circle on that power play. But they're such a deep team, particularly at forward. I mean, Cooper really rolls four lines, and they're a very aggressive forechecking team. They come after you with all four lines. They have a lot of speed, and with the way Kucherov, in my opinion, has become a superstar in the league, and then add guys like Point, who's also becoming a superstar, and who I think is hands down the pick for the Conn Smythe Trophy winner here. I don't think they miss him all that much. In fact, because of some of his injuries and his age now, if anything, Stamkos, other than on the power play, he slows them down a bit. So that's just my opinion. I just think they have overall team speed, and the way they play so aggressively forechecking forwards, I don't think they miss him at all.
Well, I got to tell you, Mike, I do enjoy the "I told you so"s because there's a reason why you're my hockey analyst and expert, so you could tell me so. So I'm okay with it. I predicted Vegas will win the whole thing. So
Knights and you're this and Edmonton Oilers and everything else, but
hey, I gave Kenny Holland a little bit more credit than I should have deserved. But you know what? I didn't go against the guy. I mean, I like my idea. That doesn't mean they always necessarily go through either. Ken Holland doesn't have to leave his area code, team in the bubble, bounced early, whatever. You told me so.
I'll went with the Lightning, I know.
They're awfully good. I know that much. All right, George.
You look at this roster, and like you said, Mike, there's like stars at every position. Kevin Shattenkirk, Tyler Johnson, Kucherov, Palat, Point. I mean, you go down the list, and I tell you, the current general manager gets credit, but boy, one man who does get a lot of credit for molding this team is good old Stevie Yzerman from Detroit. Stevie left to come up to the Red Wings job when the Ilitches asked him to come and take over for Kenny Holland, and I know part of Stevie is still there on Tampa Bay's team, and obviously he gets a lot of credit. I know some of his number one picks maybe didn't pan out as much as they want, but Tampa Bay, I saw a statistic. They have the second most playoff wins in the NHL since 2013-14. So they've been sniffing this Stanley Cup for a long, long time. And if it goes to them, well-deserved. And obviously, Stevie Y had a good part of building that franchise. And you're right, Mike and Scott. They are a great team. They've done a great job. They play with finesse. They're hard. They're gritty. And they really are the mark of a true champion. Should it turn out that way in this last game tonight or the next game, Game 7.
Well, let's face the reality. He changed the culture in that area. Mike, you lived there to begin with. The last 10 years have been great, but prior to that, they were anything but.
Yeah, well, first of all, George is absolutely right. I mean, Steve Yzerman came down there and had a plan and learned how to put a hockey team together, because of his time in Detroit, with Kenny Holland, of course. And to his credit, because when he retired from playing, he was willing to go and put in the work and do things. Unlike a lot of former players that think that they automatically, because they played in the league, should be handed the GM's job. And
yeah.
Stevie put in his time and worked at it. And so when he went down there, he knew what he was doing, and he did a great job. But I'll take it one step beyond that, in that they have themselves a great owner. And, much like the Ilitch family was in Detroit, the owner in Tampa is fantastic. Jeff Vinnick came in there, and he's a good businessman. And he's such a good businessman that he understood that he didn't know anything about hockey, and he was going to hire the best people he could, whatever it took to get him there. And it did take him some wrangling to get Steve Yzerman there initially, but he got him there, and then he let him do his job. And a lot of owners in all sports, but particularly the ones I know in hockey, don't do that. And some of them want to meddle. Some of them want to change the course or change the plan every couple of years. But Jeff Finnick put Steve Yzerman in there. He trusted him. He let him do the job, and now it's paying off. Even though Steve's moved on, Steve filled other positions in that organization with qualified people that understood and learned from him. So kudos to the whole organization. Stevie did a lot of great things while he's there. He's going to do a lot of good things in Detroit. But it really starts, I think, in all sports with ownership.
I would think at some point down the road, I hope the Lightning would put a statue of Steve Yzerman over there as well. Whether they ever do it or not is another story. I mean, Phil Esposito was a big part of getting that team there. Yzerman's done a great job changing the culture there. But that said,
everybody gets a statue these days. Jeez.
I know.
Going to arenas and stadiums and seeing statues outside.
Yeah, come on. Statues of what? Hey, listen, you know what? My man Don Mattingly here got a place in Monument Park, and he had his number retired. So, and yet he never won a world championship, but he's doing a good job with the Marlins. With that said, we'll stay on the hockey. Hey, listen, Derek Jeter's done pretty good work for himself, even though he was never in the executive area. He certainly learned from a lot of good people with the Yankees, and he's bringing that down here to Miami. With that said, we'll talk about some American-born players. The guy I'm referring to tonight was Joe Pavelski, who had a tying goal against Tampa Bay, the Lightning in Game 5 that put him solely in first place on the all-time American playoff scorers in that 3-2 win. Now, let me give you break it down a little bit. The Dallas Stars forward, late equalizer, his second in as many nights, was his 61st postseason marker in 160 career playoff games. He passed Joe Mullen, who netted 60 in 143 playoff contests. And for that matter, Pavelski eclipsed Mike Modano's total of 58 and tied Mullen with a pair of goals during the Stars' 5-4 overtime loss on Friday. A lot of good American hockey names I just brought up, Mike. Goes to show you many years ago, a predominantly Canadian sport, you internationalize it, and now you're bringing on these American players. They're making a difference, and those are some pretty good names, weren't they?
Yeah, well, look, I know Joe Mullen. He's a little older than me, but also played at Boston College. And this is a guy that grew up in Hell's Kitchen, New York, on roller skates, and not only ended up being a tremendously skilled player, but for a guy that's not very big, was tough as nails. Had a lot of great years and a lot of great playoff years in St. Louis. And finally, when he moved on to Calgary and then Pittsburgh, won some Stanley Cups. So I think that Joe Pavelski maybe could be taking that same route. He actually chose Dallas as a free agent last summer over Tampa Bay, which was his other choice. So it's interesting to see that those are the two teams meeting now in the finals. But Joe Pavelski reminds me a lot of Joe Mullen in that he plays with a lot of grit. He's an honest player, and he's never really been the star attraction on any team. In all those years in San Jose, he played second fiddle to guys like Joe Thornton. And and even now, I would say that he's probably not the top dog in Dallas. But all in all, I don't think there's anybody on that team now or on the San Jose teams that he played for that would say that if they had to pick one guy to go to battle with every night, they wouldn't pick Joe Pavelski. So kudos to him if he doesn't get it done this year. He's going to get another shot, I think, in Dallas to get it done.
So let's talk about the American-born player per se and how far the American-born player has come throughout the years, Mike. You've obviously been around it. You've scouted. What we've seen, I mentioned three names, but when you talk about a lot of the other guys that have come through the pipeline with the strength of college hockey and, of course, the feeder systems, they're just unbelievable. Obviously, in the metropolitan Detroit area, you've got the CompuWare program out there as well that breeds a lot of prospects. And, talk about the American player per se.
Yeah, well, I'm a guy that can talk about it because I'm an American-born player that didn't make it. So.
But it is really good feeder system the way it's really developed over the
Well,
years.
look, I think that you've got to give a lot of credit to the NHL and also credit to USA Hockey.
Right.
Done a lot of things for the sport. When I was growing up, I grew up in Boston. It was one of those three areas, if you will. Boston, more generally New England, Michigan, and Minnesota. And that's where hockey players came from.
Right.
And honestly, that's where U.S.-born hockey players came from for the most part until pretty close to the year 2000. A lot of people will give Bruce McNall and Wayne Gretzky and the LA Kings of the very late 80s and early 90s for the hockey boom in the United States and in the so-called Sun Belt areas of the country. But it was actually the NHL's plan before the Gretzky trade to expand into bigger markets in the U.S., more for revenue reasons than anything else. And, you see now, 25 years later, what's happened. I mean, you've got players in the NHL who have come from places like Florida and California and Texas and have made it because they had the opportunity to start playing the sport when they were young. And I think that that USA Hockey in particular has done a very good job of placing emphasis on skill development and skating. And, there's no doubt that when you watch the players that play today compared to the players that played 20 years ago, compared to the players that played 40 years ago, that the speed of the game is like nothing that's, that we've ever seen. The skill is just getting, better and better. They shoot the puck harder and harder. And the physicality is still there without the fighting. And for so many years, we, the hockey purists, complained about you can't take fighting out of the game. And other people argued that, the violence was killing the sport and other people wouldn't watch it because of the violence. And I really think when you look back at it now, that fighting has really slipped out of the game for the most part, and nobody cares. The sport sells itself. I'm sure, like you guys who are astute hockey guys, if you ever talk to somebody that's never been to a game or doesn't understand the sport, the first thing you do is you tell them, go to a game live, sit as close to the ice as you can, and understand the speed of the game, the skillfulness of the players, the physicality of the sport, and then you're hooked. And that's what's gone on. Now all of that's gotten the NHL more viewership on TV. We can now watch hockey pretty much any night of the week. The NBC sports coverage they have in the United States is terrific. And of course the Canadian coverage, both French and English, has always been fantastic. So the sports come a long way, and I credit the NHL for having some foresight, and the USA Hockey folks for really implementing a plan for developing young players into the players we see today.
Does the name Sam Greenblatt ring a bell to you at all?
No.
Yeah, he was in charge of USA Hockey back in the 70s and the 80s, or was heavily involved. So Sam Greenblatt, just thought. George Eichorn and I know him all too well. George, what are your thoughts about the American player?
Well, you hit it on the head, USA Hockey, and we're proud home of that now. We have the USA Arena. They moved from Ann Arbor to Plymouth, Michigan. The former CompuWare Arena is now the home of USA under 17, under 18. I had a chance to see a game there a little over a year ago. and it's terrific hockey. The young men that come from many different parts of the land to play there at USA Hockey Arena in Plymouth are gifted athletes, and we're very proud to have them right here in our own backyard in Metro Detroit. And when those kids get drafted, I'll tell you, it's a source of excitement for the media as well as the families and some of the families that house these players when they play for USA teams here in Plymouth, Michigan. I think it's a great success story, the United States. Don't forget, one of our favorites is Chris Chelios, born in Chicago. I'm surprised he's not in that top 3 list, but I know Madano, obviously being from Livonia, Michigan, has got connections to our area. When you talk about the top 3 scorers of all time from USA, Chris Chelios, I'm sure, is in the top 10. And he kind of parted ways with the Red Wings, unfortunately. Took a job with Chicago. I'm happy for Chris. We miss him here in Detroit. He had to sell his restaurants. He had a restaurant in Dearborn, Michigan, and one in downtown Detroit. And unfortunately, things didn't work out any further with him and the Red Wings. So he got a great opportunity, of course, from the fabulous folks at the Blackhawks there in Chicago to go there. So we miss Chris Chelios. And, of course, Madano doesn't have anything to do with the Red Wings at all. He's with the Dallas Stars organization. And might I also add here, Scott and Mike, hats off to Jim Nill. Again, another situation where this guy toiled in the background for years and years and years. I'd see Jim Nill sitting in that press room loyally next to Ken Holland's side as they ate dinner together. And Jim Nill, just a quiet man. He looked like a walrus with that mustache, but in a very intelligent man. And hats off to Jim Nill for the good job he's done with the Dallas Stars, obviously trying to mold that franchise into this Stanley Cup championship that he's seeking. And again, a protege of Kenny Holland, much like Stevie Yzerman. So hats off to Jim Nill and his efforts too down in Dallas.
Yeah, I got to know Jim Nill pretty well when I was covering the regular Red Wings a little bit more often. And I got to tell you, Gary Bettman's done a good job, obviously, growing hockey in the NHL for a while, too. So, I think it's a collective effort for sure. All right, let's talk about a couple of other Detroit Red Wings notes while we have another 10 or 15 minutes to go here. Red Wings, the New York Rangers traded Mark Stahl to the Red Wings. George, why don't you go into more details about that transaction?
Well, the Red Wings are looking for a veteran defenseman. I know that there's a lot of guys that are free agents right now that they probably are not going to bring back, and we're going to talk about them in a little bit. But Stahl is a steady guy, and obviously they need a veteran presence back there. The Red Wings are unfortunately not very deep in the blue line situation, so there was a need to pick him up, Stahl. He's still got a couple of good years left, I would think, Mike and Scott. And the Red Wings right now, again, until these youngsters on the blue line can really come through day in and day out, game in, game out, they're going to be a little bit struggling down there in that position. And I think that, Steve Yzerman obviously is not going to go all in. He's not going to go all in for big free agents right now because the Red Wings are not that close. And they're not close to that period where the Ilitch family is ready probably to open up the purse strings again. We'll never see the days that we did back in the 80s, 90s, and the 2000s when the Red Wings were just opening up the purse strings and going after all these big name free agents. Of course, those days are gone. But I do think picking up a guy like Stahl is a good move. It's he's a solid 3 or 4 maybe, Mike. I don't know, on defense. Yeah. What do you think?
I mean, he can play in your top 4, but I think what you said, George, is the most important thing. He's going to give him a veteran presence and some leadership. And, much like when he was in Tampa, Steve Yzerman is going to be all about drafting and development. And, these Tampa guys, a good number of them had success winning a Calder Cup in Norfolk in the American Hockey League. And I think you're going to see the same thing with Stevie, at the helm of Detroit. He's going to draft well, and he's going to develop guys in Grand Rapids, and they'll make their way up to the big team when they're ready.
Mm-hmm.
And when the time comes, he'll know, about adding the right players to. But you can't rush development. And so it's much better to have a young defenseman developing in the American Hockey League where he can make mistakes, where he can learn on a nightly basis and play at a high level and play in all situations, than to try to rush him into the NHL where he's not going to get the most out of his game and he can't afford, to make mistakes and to develop. So you're better off sliding veterans into those spots. Really what I think a guy like, in addition to being a leader and a veteran, I think a guy like Stahl is just a placeholder until one of these young kids comes along in the next couple of years.
Well, don't forget the fact that the Red Wings acquired a draft choice in the deal, and the New York Rangers unloaded a little bit of money to go along with it. So nowadays I'm seeing a trend in sports where you unload a big salary. It's basically a one-year rental, and you get a pick in return. We've seen that. That seems to be more a recurring trend nowadays too. So unload the money.
For sure.
Get the rental, okay, and get the pick, and you've accomplished a couple of things at one time. Another move that the Red Wings, maybe we talked about Steve Yzerman, Jonathan Ericsson, Trevor Daley, Jimmy Howard, no more in Detroit. There's a few veterans I'm throwing at you, Mike. Where are those guys landing? Again, it's a matter of Yzerman getting rid of the old and trying to bring in the new. And I'd be curious to find out where you think Jimmy Howard could land.
I don't really see a spot for Jimmy Howard right now, unless somebody like Kenny Holland wanted to take him out in Edmonton. It's just, he had great years for Detroit. There's no doubt about it. He came in as a young goaltender and eventually got the spot. But there's so many good goaltenders in the league now, and there's so many big goaltenders in the league now that I just don't see anybody wanting to pay a lot of money for a veteran like Jimmy Howard unless they know him real well, and the guy that knows him best is probably Kenny Holland. As far as the other guys, honestly, I'm surprised Trevor Daley's continued to play in the league the last couple of years. He's had a great career, but if it wasn't a situation like Detroit where they were looking for a serviceable veteran, a placeholder, he probably wouldn't have been in the league the last couple of years. And Ericsson, his whole career in Detroit, so he was there at the tail end of those great teams, and he's been a good soldier for them for a lot of years.
Yeah, I agree. Jimmy Howard, I look at his stats, and they just weren't there last year. Obviously, he struggled mightily. He leads the team. He's the third most winningest goalie, believe it or not, in Red Wing history, I found out, with 246 wins. And he's also third most in games played, behind two guys that are familiar to us, Mike and Scott, named Terry Sawchuk and Chris Osgood. Right. So Jimmy's had a long run in Detroit, but he's also suffered too, 196, almost 200 losses. So he's had some good years, but he's also had some lean years, not all due to his goaltending, obviously due to sometimes porous defense in front of him. But I agree, Mike. I don't see a place for him. I think that, if he's a backup on another team somewhere, even that, like you said, is a bit of a stretch. He's a great guy. He's a great man in the locker room and a nice guy to have around. But boy, oh boy, his skill level seems to have dropped off a notch or two.
When you look at last year's numbers, okay, this past season, he had a winning save percentage of .882, the worst mark in the league among goalies that played at least 27 contests, and a minus 22.12 goals saved to go along with a 2-win, 23-loss, and 2 record. That's bad. I don't know. I can't remember the last goaltender that had a record that bad. 2-23-2, and I guess the only thing I can say about Howard is you'd hate to see a pretty good career end with that record at the very end. It's almost like it's telling you that hung around too long, even though you realize that may not necessarily totally be the case because the team was poor anyhow, but that's a tough way to end if indeed it does.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
again, he had a good career, and maybe maybe Kenny Holland brings him in for a year as a backup, just because he knows he's a good person. Then again, maybe Jimmy Howard doesn't want to play anymore either. He's maybe at a good point in his life, and he's okay with moving on.
Well, I think he wants to play, Mike.
Yeah, I do too.
Either Ted Colfin or Helene St. James, the two beat writers for the Red Wings, one of them, I think it might have been Teddy Colfin of the Detroit News, did an interview with him, and he said, "I'm raring to go. He wants to play," and in the interview, at least, he was determined, to put last year behind him. But again, he is a very positive, upbeat kind of guy, and it's just a matter of would anybody want to take him on, like you said. And I still think there's that burning desire in him, but again, the skill level is what I would question after those kind of statistics that you rattled off, Scott.
Yeah, I mean, his starting days are over. So, yeah, if you bring him in as a backup 10, 15 games a year to spell the number one goaltender. So, with that said, now let's talk about goaltenders for a moment. Okay, Mike, we saw this. I thought that we would see a lot more of Marc-Andre Fleury with Vegas, but Robin Lehner became the main man there. They're looking to keep him. What the heck is going on in Vegas with that goaltending situation?
Well, I mean, Pete DeBoer, took over the team as a coach, and I think he just prefers Lehner. I think it's that simple. I don't know anything but good things about Marc-Andre Fleury as a person, and everything I hear, except from his agent Alan Walsh, is that he wants to stay in Vegas even if he is the number two guy. So I don't think there's any real issue there, other than the agent, who and I know Alan. I've known him for a long time. This is what he's like, and but I think Marc-Andre Fleury even spoke up when the agent started tweeting and told him to knock it off. But yeah, no, I don't know. I mean, he certainly came in with a bang and went to the finals the first year. But goaltending's it's a tough position. Only one guy can get the net every night, and Leonard won the job with Pete DeBoer, and it's going to be tough to wrangle it away from him.
Yeah, pretty hard to really leave Las Vegas. No state income tax, beautiful weather in the desert. Nice place to live. I once considered moving to Vegas before I came back to Florida. George, anything else you want to ask Mike?
Well, Mike, I just want to ask your opinion on the exhibition season. Okay, we saw in pro football they got rid of the exhibition games. Is the exhibition season in hockey, do you think, Mike, too long? And should they also consider cutbacks? And I know the NFL had obviously a huge percentage of that was obviously because of COVID-19. But what are your thoughts about preseason exhibition? Is it too long? Do we really need that many games to get ready for the regular season, Mike?
I mean, the NHL quite a few years ago now cut their exhibition season down. I mean, in the 80s, they used to play as many as 14 or 15 games. Now most teams play about 8.
Uh-huh.
And I don't think it's too long, although you probably could cut it by another game or two, only because now you've got a rookie camp that takes place a week before the main camp. And most of these teams are playing in rookie tournaments where the young kids are getting in 3 or 4 games, whether it's up in Traverse City or out in Western Canada. In BC, they have one. There's one that actually I started down in South Florida, which includes Carolina and Tampa and Florida and Nashville every year. So you could cut it down by a game or two. But I do think I think the nature of the sport, you've gotta get guys and ease them into it a little bit. And when you're bringing in 55 or 60 guys to a training camp, I've been there before. The worst thing to do is cut a guy, and the first thing he says to you is, "I didn't even get in a game."
Yeah.
So I think that what you see in the NHL is the first 2 or 3 games are used to get guys in the games. And then the last 3 or 4 or 5 games are really to make your decisions on those final lineup spots and really get your team ready and playing a system before the season starts. So I think that's I think they're at a good number. I really do.
Okay.
And again, if you wanted to cut it down by a game or two, but I wouldn't go much lower than that.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah.
Anything else you want to ask him, George?
Well, if we do start in January, guys, are we still going to have the marquee events like the All-Star Game, which obviously was postponed this year, or the Winter Classic, which is always on New Year's Day? Or are these going to just be victims of the bubble, if you will, and we'll have to wait another year on those 2 marquee events? What are your guys' thoughts on those?
I think they're gonna be victim to the pandemic, unfortunately.
Uh-huh.
I know, like the American Hockey League, the ECHL, they've already canceled their All-Star events. I think that's what you'll find is I think they're gonna go away. As far as the Winter Classic, I don't think you can have a Winter Classic with an empty stadium. That really is what, aside from playing outside in the first game when they had it in Buffalo with Pittsburgh and Buffalo and the snowflakes falling, what really is the draw is, 110,000 people in Michigan Stadium, right? I mean, that's really what it's at, where it's at. It's playing hockey in Fenway Park with 40,000 people, even though, 39,995 of them can't even see the ice surface from where they're sitting. And they don't sit down because they're so cold. It really is. That's what the celebration is, in my opinion. It's really the crowd. So I don't think you can have a real true and effective Winter Classic without people there.
Mike, I should tell you, I feel bad about the All-Star Game. It was supposed to be coming to Sunrise too. I was looking forward to going back.
They'll probably give it back to them in 2 years or something. They usually find a way to bring it back to where it was planned. But I don't see how they can do that, particularly, again, as George said, if they don't pick up and start playing until January, they're likely to be playing a 40 to 50 game season. And how do you pick an all-star team, first of all? And you really don't want to be playing an all-star game in sometime in early March. So it just doesn't, I just don't think it works with everything else they're trying to do.
Well, here's a little development I should point out to you. Okay, you're familiar with the ice den here in Coral Springs, right?
Yes.
Well, you know what? The Panthers have announced, where Holiday Park is by War Memorial Auditorium?
Fort Lauderdale, huh?
Right. So you know what? They're talking about constructing a brand new practice facility that houses 3,000 fans. It'll be like 2 buildings over there to renovate that area so the Panthers would go ahead and practice there, and then they'd be able to use it, a couple facilities in an effort to revitalize that Fort Lauderdale area. Well, the War Memorial Auditorium area is a really nice area. I used to cover boxing events there and other things. So
I think that's a great idea, and I can tell you from experience that the players, especially the young players, that's where they want to live. They want to live in and around Fort Lauderdale.
Right.
So to be close to the practice facility and have it be more convenient, I think that's the way to do it.
Well, that's where they're headed. I'll feel bad because the other facility is only 10 minutes away, but understand the logic. And I guess that it does show you that the Florida Panthers owner is committed to the area for sure. So, it's a good move. As much as I hate to see it go there, I certainly understand the logic behind it. And you being a former Panthers guy would probably know better than anybody that indeed it's the right call. George, anything else that you want to add before you can promote your book?
No, I think that's about it, Scott. Like I said, the Red Wings are on the rebound. Obviously, there's a lot of still pent-up excitement here in the Motor City, Little Caesars Arena, now 3 or 4 years old. It's hard to believe it's brand new, but it's already been around for 3 years. Great facility. it just doesn't have the atmosphere, though, guys, as Joe Louis Arena. Obviously, Joe Louis Arena, as they call the old days, the bandbox effect, and the everybody was on top of the action. Not a good place as far as the enmities go at Joe Louis Arena. They did the best they could with it. But Little Caesars Arena has all those special features to it, but it just doesn't have the electricity. It doesn't have the buzz yet. And until the Red Wings start winning, I don't think it will have that kind of excitement that we had, obviously, in Detroit when the Red Wings were winning Stanley Cups and challenging for division and conference titles year after year after year. What, Scott, 20? How many? I lost track. Is it 26, 27 years in a row they made the playoffs?
25, I believe, right?
25. Okay.
Yeah, but meanwhile, you're saying that about the Joe. But remember when the Joe came on board, everybody loved Olympia Stadium, so go figure.
That's true. It goes in cycles. You're right.
Stanley Cup update, the Tampa Bay Lightning with 19:39 left in the third, 2-0. They still lead the Stars. With that said, George, why don't you go ahead and have an opportunity to promote your book? Mike can do let people know how they get a hold of them, and we'll wrap up the broadcast. Go ahead, George. Let people know.
Thank you, God, and it's a pleasure being with you and Mike tonight. I am the author of Detroit Sports Broadcasters on the Air, which is a very nice pictorial book. There's a whole page in there of my friend and colleague, Scott Morganroth. I think, Scott, you got a picture there with Muhammad Ali, and then isn't there another one with Jimmy Connors?
Yeah, pretty good company there for sure.
Yeah, and Scott, you graced the pages along with, shall we do some name dropping? Ernie Harwell, who wrote the foreword for the book, George Kell, Ty Tyson, Bruce Martin, Bud Lynch, Ken Kell, Mickey Redman, and Ray Lane, and so many other great Detroit broadcasters of the past, Van Patrick. And so my book is available. There's a link to it on my profile on the South Florida Tribune website. You can click there. The book is about $20, and you can also get it on Amazon.com as well. So Detroit Sports Broadcasters on the Air. And you can reach me also on Twitter at DSBA2. And Scott, again, great being with you tonight. Thank you.
Mike, go ahead. Let people know they get a hold of you, my hockey expert.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. Best way to get a hold of me is it's pretty easy. It's msantos@hockeyoperations.org. And I can do anything hockey-wise. So if you're interested for help with anything from player development to acquiring a team or a league or you name it, I'm your guy.
Well, not only are you my guy for hockey, but Mike Santos has been on the broadcast talking about boxing and MMA. So we bring him on for other stuff as well. He made that point very clear to me when I was out in Tampa on my birthday that, I can contribute in other ways, and I enjoy bringing you on. I'm actually going to consider bringing on a big boxing guest, and if I do, when the time comes, you're my man, and we're going to have a real knockout of a broadcast, pun intended. So with that said, let you know how you can hear and view this broadcast. You can hear this broadcast through Apple Podcasts, Spreaker, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Google Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts. I'll say that again. Apple Podcasts, Spreaker, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Google Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts. In terms of following us on social media and whatnot, you can follow us on Twitter at Tribune South. That's at Tribune South. You can follow us on Facebook and Instagram, like the South Florida Tribune. YouTube channel, which is where you're going to see this broadcast. Subscribe to South Florida Tribune YouTube channel. Our website is www.southfloridatribune.com. The broadcasts appear there as well as contributions from our regular columnists. We have a section there for Motor City Monitor for a lot of our Detroit transplants, as well as the rest of our local content and media distribution partners as well. A very loaded website. You can email us at southfloridatribune@gmail.com, and you can connect with me on LinkedIn, Scott Morganroth. I'll be more than happy to accept your request. And I got to tell you, on behalf of Mike and George, we hope everybody out there takes COVID-19 seriously, that you mask up, you do the right things, you use common sense, common courtesy. This virus doesn't look like it's going away anytime soon, so we have to be smart with how we go about handling things. So meanwhile, it's great to have both of you guys on the broadcast tonight. look forward
Thank
to doing it again. But Mike, like I said, I have two people that I'm glad that I can introduce tonight, and two people that I value very much. So I'm glad that we were able to make it happen tonight here on what looks like could be a very clinching night for the Tampa Bay Lightning, unless Dallas Stars can put the puck in the net and former Red Wing Rick Bowness has a pep talk that he needs. This game could be over tonight. So any other things you want to add, guys?
No, thank
No.
you, Scott. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's been a great hockey season. If it does end tonight, hats off to Commissioner Bettman and the Players Association and the owners for putting this all together like we talked about earlier. Thanks,
Once
Scott.
again, this is a Sports Exchange. My name is Scott Morganoff. Mike Santos and George Eichorn are with me tonight. Everybody have a good night. Until the next time, take care, everybody, and be safe out there and be smart. Good night, everybody.